Welcome to the Aviation Safety Community Podcast, presented by the aviation safety community and by today's sponsor, FlightLogix, dedicated to progressing aviation safety, leadership, training and research in the air and on the ground. In today's episode, our host, Grenville Hudson, interviews Robert Forster Lee, a fatigue management specialist at the Civil Aviation Authority, regarding the future of fatigue management.
Hello, I'm Grenville Hudson, and this is the Aviation Safety Community Podcast. And with me is Dr. Robert Forster Lee, who's a fatigue management specialist with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in Australia. How are you going, Robert?
Doing well, feeling just slightly under the weather, but it's not COVID, so I'm okay.
Well, let's hope it doesn't get any worse. Robert, you're currently with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and I know you're very much involved with the CAO 48.1 rollout. I thought maybe you could just give us a bit of a background on yourself and what you've been doing over, since you started working. Just a brief overview. Yeah.
When you talk to an older person, brief is very, very relative. But in the aviation safety sphere, previous to coming on board at CASA, I was employed by the Royal Australian Navy working in their Fleet Aviation Safety Cell. So I was part of the team that was promoting the culture change towards safety. This resulted from the accident on Nias, where there were 9 fatalities of aviation civilian staff. And so, historically, there was a board of inquiry and a number of things were pointed out in their safety system or lack thereof. And so I was brought on board there, and I was with Defense for a number of years, going through not only implementing their safety management and their change management towards safety, but that naturally, or what I like to say organically, we then started looking at fatigue and well-being as part of it, because in a good safety management system, it's not just about the maintenance or the piloting of aircraft. It's a holistic approach. And so, I was involved with that for a number of years. So worked with very good teams, very strong teams that usually involved pilots or tactical officers, maintenance engineers, and engineers in general. A lot of different perspectives. And so I always like to reflect on that, saying that's a very positive type of environment for safety, because you're hearing it from all sides. And so I was there for well over a decade, and went through a lot of changes, both with Navy and Defense in general, because of course the RAF and the Army were also upping their programs in safety management at the same time. So we all started off in our own ways, and over a period of time, the systems began to merge because there are some common, in spite of different type of taskings, there are some commonalities of safety. And and then from there, I proceeded to the role of fatigue specialist at CASA, where I've been for the last 4 years.
Mm. So. And you've been very actively involved in fatigue risk management programs associated with CASA and the 48.1 regulations. So have you got some sort of, how do you see fatigue now compared to where it was, say, 10 years ago? How do you see our perception of fatigue now?
Well, there's a great deal more understanding of fatigue, as there is of safety in general. And I like to say, when I started in Defense, they had spoken with a consultant. And the consultant said, oh, yes, it will take 5 years to bring about change. And their understanding from that, and I don't think this is what the consultant meant, but the understanding of defense was, oh, okay, so all we need to do is instantiate a few changes, and in 5 years, everything will be better. And so when I came on board, I had to explain, in 5 years, you'll look back and say, wow, that was really risky stuff we were doing. I said, in 10 years, you'll look back at 5 years and you'll say, holy, how did we get away with that? My goodness, there was a lot of risk we didn't account for. In 15 years, you'll look back on 10 years and you'll say, oh, woo, what's going on? So when you say, what's been going on in the last 10 years, as we evolve, we realize more and more that what was acceptable at one point in time, we wouldn't necessarily find very safe today. So with the advent of, increase in knowledge, the technology and, the engineering, I think, in 10 years that fatigue has grown, exponentially and will continue to grow, But I think that, when we say, where are we at, from 10 years, we're still in the middle of it,
Right.
and we still have a ways to go. And we can, and as a safety person and having been around for a while, I can say that, it's really, there's been some changes in what we know, and there's been some changes in what we do. But the one thing that we still haven't done is we still haven't gotten everyone on board. And I think that's the key. So when you say, so what are you doing with safety? It's like, well, we're still trying to get everyone on board, because there are still individuals who say, I only do safety because there's what we used to say is the policeman at the elbow, So as much as we've advanced, we still haven't gotten everyone on board. And
would you say that's worldwide? It's not just in Australia, surely.
Oh, look, that's not an Australian phenomenon. That's a world phenomenon. And in fact, the unfortunate thing is that because we have all this U-Butte technology, we have all this increased knowledge, a lot of individuals become very complacent, and they take things for granted. And there becomes this underlying assumption, well, everybody knows this stuff, don't they? And, we start to engineer safety. And so we start to rely on that. And a great example is, I don't know, maybe it was almost 10 years ago. I was walking down a street in Melbourne, and it was night. And I noticed some flashing lights in the street. I thought, what the heck are these things? And what they had done was they put lights in the street to coordinate with the pedestrian crossing. And at first I wondered, what's this about? Why are they putting lights in the street? And then I realized, because people are looking at their phones or they're texting while walking. And so, they're now putting some things to get people's awareness that, hey, don't step in front of cars. You're stepping against the light. And so here's an engineering fix. And everyone says, isn't that a wonderful thing? And by the way, unfortunately, these things have been promoted, and you notice them more and more on, especially in the city, heavy city regions. And I think, but that just reinforces bad behavior. You shouldn't be texting while walking. That's not a good thing. It reduces your SA. And so again, I say, so 10 years up, look, we got these U-Butte engineering things. We now put the seconds you have to cross the street on the lights. Well, yeah, but people look and they say, 2 seconds, it's 40 meters. I can make it. It doesn't change human behavior, unfortunately. And I guess that's what I keep getting at, is that, we've learned a lot of things. We've instantiated some change, especially with technology. But unfortunately, we still haven't changed the human part.
And do you think that will ever change?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
I always say people are smart enough to outwit the safest system that we can create.
So you talked about like three key issues there: knowledge, engineering, and technology. In terms of the knowledge side of things, and that's a big part of the CAO 48.1, isn't it? I mean, we have to do a lot of training of people to get everyone's knowledge side of it up. But where do you see the big advantage of the knowledge side of things is in the management of fatigue?
Well, and here's the other thing with knowledge, and we've seen it in Australia. We see it very much in America. People are knowledge seekers in general. People are looking to the world. They're trying to find meaning. They're trying to organize things. You know, that's a natural psychological phenomenon. The unfortunate thing with knowledge now is, well, what's your source? And if it's QAnon, unfortunately, you know, that may not be an accurate source. And unfortunately, as wild as of theories that can be, you know, put out there, people believe these things. And safety is no different. You know, people will say, "Oh, use this methodology. You know, do this, and you'll become more safer." You know, and so it's not just that we have knowledge, and we need to have that knowledge, and we need to promote knowledge, but we need to have the right knowledge, and we need to do it consistent. You know, we have to be very consistent across aviation with that. And I think that's the key: is that it's not just that we do training. Is that the training is, you know, there's a lot of fidelity across it. You know, it's very reliable. It's very consistent across countries, you know, because that's the thing in aviation. It's not just limited to one, you know, country. It's international. And so we have to have agreed upon understandings to assist. It doesn't do us any good to train up in fatigue here in Australia if international flights coming in, if those pilots aren't being trained up to the same knowledge as ours, because you know, obviously, if they're at the end of a very long flight internationally and they're fatigued, and of course that would probably manifest itself on landing here in Australia, it doesn't really help us here, and it doesn't help those passengers necessarily. So that's the one thing that I guess if you had to ask me, what do we need? Yes, we need knowledge, but it needs to be knowledge that's consistent across industry. And so that we all are saying the same, you know, when we say the words, we all know what they mean, and we take it for the same, you know, the same relevancy.
And in terms of technology, where do you see that going? There's a lot of wearable things now that help track your circadian rhythms and all this sort of thing. Where do you see that sort of fitting into the whole?
Yeah, well, that's a great source of knowledge, but again, in the right way. You know, years ago when biomath models first came out, you know, everyone said, "Oh, look at this. We're using a biomath model to assess our scheduling practices, and the model says our fatigue risk is low." Well, yeah, that's good. You know, it's predicting that in all likelihood, if everything goes well in an individual's life and they're very well rested, you know, lots of assumptions, that your risk is going to be low. Does it mean there's no risk? Well, no, but people didn't hear that part. And they also didn't really think about the part of, well, okay, so it's using sleep and it's using time awake. Yeah. Well, how about those other factors in that person's life? What about, you know, their financial state? What about their emotional state? What about what's going on in their mind? Because, you know, it's not just being awake for a period of time. It's what are you doing? Have you been doing something that's really mentally taxing? Because you don't have to be up very long if you're doing something very taxing to then have that fatigue come in, that cognitive fatigue. So again, you know, people said, "Oh, here's some great technology," but they didn't quite understand that it can facilitate, it can assist, but it's not the end all be all, and it's certainly not a go no go. And so yes, we love wearable tech. We think it's going to be a big part of people's awareness and knowledge of their own monitoring of fatigue. We also believe that again, there's opportunities for industry to incorporate that individual knowledge into their scheduling practices. But of course, there's lots of issues around that with, you know, privacy and so on. that have to be addressed before that full kind of integration of the individual with the larger system can occur. But no, there's a number of new models coming out here in Australia and overseas. Those models, especially using wearable technology, and some of the technology, by the way, isn't necessarily wearable. It might be something you can keep on a nightstand that can monitor your sleep and do it quite well. So it's not necessarily the wearable tech. It's all kinds of tech that can inform both an individual. Am I fit? Do I? Along with their own perceptions. But it helps in their self-knowledge, their awareness, and their appreciation of what's going on. So I think that there's going to be a place, and it's going to become probably more and more commonplace. But at the same time, we need to be very mindful that an over-reliance on technology can also lead to complacency and a misunderstanding of what's going on with the system.
And would you put that? Where would you put the engineering side of things, Robert?
Well, and here's the thing with engineering. As human beings, we love to do things because we can. Doesn't mean we should, but we love to do things because we can. And when we talk about engineering, especially in aviation, we can't just talk about the systems on aircraft. We have to talk about the systems across aviation. So when you think about a system, you might air traffic control systems, and integrating them with the onboard systems on the aircraft. But then we have to think, okay, but what other systems are involved? Well, more and more, we're going into RPAS and UAS, so remotely piloted, systems. So, okay, so we've engineered those systems. Yes, but are those systems talking to ATC? Are they talking to, general aviation? Are they talking to, high cap aviation? Because you're flying in space, right? So again, we have all these things that we've engineered to do, but they don't operate, autonomously. There's always a human involved in it, and it's like an orchestra. Who's conducting this? And you can't just say, oh well, RPAS doesn't matter. They're just small little things that kids fly, and it's like, no, that's not true at all. And if you've ever had one of those sucked into an engine, it can do just as much damage. So again, I think when we talk about engineering, take a step back and say, are we integrating all of these systems together? We're engineering these things, but are we engineering them to fit together? If that makes any sense.
Yep. And look, finally, just what are your thoughts in terms of fatigue in the future going to impact on safety, and what's going to come out of that side of things in terms of how we operate aircraft in the future? That, I don't know if you have a view on that.
Well, how's this? There's an immediate view, the COVID view. A lot of people like to think COVID has reduced fatigue. And in some respects it has, especially international long haul, where we're not doing it. But what COVID has introduced is another element of fatigue, and it's highlighting an area of fatigue that exists. It's always been there, but it's something we haven't thought about because we've focused primarily on, again, time awake, and distance of operations. But what we haven't really thought about is, what does the pilot bring, to that aircraft? And so what COVID is doing is, look at the world right now. Look at what's going on with health concerns. Look what's going on with people who are, well, how's this? I saw a colleague from our Melbourne office just this week. It's the first time they've traveled in about a year and a year and 3 months. They literally haven't been able to move. What is that psychologically like for that individual. And so I think that the immediate effect of COVID on the psychology of pilots and fatigue is that there's a lot of other things going on in a pilot's circumstance that probably will contribute to their fatigue loads to a greater extent than potentially their workload at this time. Now, going into the future, we're going to probably rapidly go right back to where we were, the levels of fatigue, because as we know, aviation was decimated by COVID, that a number of organizations have had to let pilots go because they haven't been doing flying. So the pilots they've retained are actually being worked to a kind of as maximal level as possible. So instead of saying, oh, look, we'll try to share it amongst the many and, give everyone a little, they're saying, well, no, what we're going to do is we're going to have to cut away a few. And then those who remain, we're going to have to fly to capacity as much as possible. And as we push forward and ramp up our operations, they're going to have to then either bring back some of that pilot base, but remember, if they haven't been flying, they're not current. So they just can't bring them straight in. They have to bring them back up to currency. So I think that workload is going to become very high for pilots, again, fairly quickly, because those who are flying still will have, their workloads will be pushed out. So I think that fatigue is going to jump back in, especially for those multi-sector, longer FDPs for domestic travel. So I suspect that as aviation ramps up, that we're going to have fatigue come back up to levels reasonably quickly, simply because there's not going to be as many pilots flying those sectors.
Right. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting insight into what's ahead of us. Robert, look, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk to us about these fatigue-related topics, and hopefully we'll meet you again and talk with you again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
We would like to thank our sponsor for this episode, FlightLogix, for their continued support throughout this podcast's production. FlightLogix, providing low-cost aviation safety department solutions.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe if you liked our content, and if you're interested in learning more, feel free to find us at aviationsafetycommunity.com.au, or if you wish to continue watching, have a browse of our YouTube channel to find some more episodes and content.